Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to another review as part of our Christopher Nolan month. As you can see from the bottom of the screen and the title of the video, we are taking on the 2014 sci-fi epic that is Interstellar. We are 4 days out from Tenet. It is less than a week away. It hasn't quite sunk in yet. We'll be there opening day for it, and including this, we have 2 more films to get through. So obviously we've got our review right now, and we will be following it up on Monday. There we go. There's the schedule with Dunkirk, which is the final film we need to review before the big one, the grand premiere, if you will, of Tenet, which we're both really looking forward to. Tickets are booked. As far as I know, it as much as it can be a sold-out screening, and we'll have reviews on that. But this is one that we've definitely wanted to talk about. Again, one that we haven't really talked about massively in depth on the channel, similar to a lot of the other ones we've done. By the way, good a chance as any. Go and check out some of those previous reviews, some for the lesser known Nolan films at the beginning of his filmography. But we have been getting into, well, pretty much since Dark Knight, really, we've been touching on the big ones now, haven't we?
Yeah, it's the kind of streak I always call it, that you get to Batman Begins onwards and you're on. It's already like a good journey, like upwards in terms of everything, scope, whatever you want to say. But it's the big ones, and as far as Interstellar goes, it was okay, he's finished Batman, now what's he going to do? That was always the discussion upon this, because obviously, even with Inception, it was between Batman films, you knew there had to be another one, but you know, when a couple of years build-up was to this is the last Batman film, he's not coming back, it's now he's in this post-Batman territory, which I guess it's still, Tenet's the third film since post-Batman, but it's still crazy, that's 8 years ago. Which is very quick. And obviously there's been many more Batman. We've been watching DC Fandom tonight, so keep your eyes peeled on the channel for some videos that may crop up over the next few days. That's all we're going to say right now, but as we know, some panels are happening as we speak. Anyway, Interstellar-wise, yes, it's a weird one. Not a weird one, this one, but in terms of it being that we've sat here, we've had these 2 hours videos, 1 hour videos. Anyone that joined us for the quiz, thank you very much. We love the feedback on that. And if you're new, you saw the quiz, you haven't seen other videos, and as Chris mentioned, do check them out. They're a lot of fun. Before we get into it, we'll talk about social medias. The best way to find us, the best way to know if we're going live for videos is on Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, and the same on Instagram. And we also have our own store on TeePublic, which is in the link in the description below. So there, the intros out the way. Also, as you know, if anyone's watching live, do comment with us on the stream. We'll be replying to comments as we go live. And if you're watching late, if you're not on the stream, just comment below your thoughts on the video. And don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. We've got some goals we're trying to get to, which would be great. We can meet them by the end of the year. So we need all your support for that. And if you have liked these videos, just drop them a nice, polite share. Everyone's doing their Tenet reviews, it's worth mentioning. We haven't seen it. We haven't read reviews. We don't look at spoilers. We don't want you to look at spoilers either. There's a new trailer that came out last night, which me and you both avoided. Yeah, we both said we won't watch it. There's a music video that's come out. I've listened to the song, which we'll probably play before Wednesday. And that's by someone called Travis Scott, who I've recently discovered this week because it's the very unobvious pairing. Anyway, going back to Interstellar. I don't really know where to begin. Let's go with our first thoughts, first time we watched this, because as we mentioned, this is 6 years ago now. This is crazy how quickly this has flown by. I'm going to jump in with mine for once. So this is one of the final films I saw at the original Birmingham IMAX, I guess I can call it, before it lost its... Well, it already lost its IMAX license. Instead, it was just like the biggest screen in the Midlands. And it was in a science museum in a dome. And obviously I was still buzzing. We still called it IMAX. You know, when you're on name association of a building, even if it's changed ownership. And I was there opening night. And the hype to this one was very different. I mentioned Dark Knight Rises, that was the be-all and end-all of everything. You know, there hadn't been a Star Wars 7 at this point. Everything was riding on that film. And then it was known as doing sci-fi. And I've always been a big sci-fi fan. But this isn't like hardcore sci-fi. This is original science fiction. This is 2001: A Space Odyssey, which from the very get-go Nolan said was his biggest inspiration for this. And I believe 2001 got a re-release at cinemas when this film came out as well. Yeah. That was the first time I saw it. So that was interesting to its own little thing. But I saw this opening day and I really enjoyed it. And then I saw it again that same weekend and I enjoyed it as well. But I didn't have the lingering... I mean, internet discourse wasn't... It was getting bigger, but there wasn't a... I need to speak to all my friends about this film for a couple of hours. It wasn't anything like that. This was a different time. So that was my kind of big thing. going into this, it wasn't, there was hype, but it just kind of, similar to what I talked about Dunkirk, it sort of it came and went. And I really enjoyed the film, getting into it as a whole. But the big thing for me is I'm going to have to tell you the same boring story again. In March, the following.
They might not have heard it though, so yeah, no, go for it.
One of the undoubted highlights of my life is Interstellar Live. In March, the following year, March 2015, Royal Albert Hall said we're doing a film in concert. It's going to be Interstellar's just come out, and we're going to be playing the film with the soundtrack. So that's really cool. Mom's into Hans Zimmer music, so we both booked tickets for row one. Then over the next 2 months, it then became Hans Zimmer's going to be scoring. He's going to be playing in the orchestra. Okay, that's incredible. Then it was Nolan's attending. Then it was Kip Thorne, Stephen Hawking. Every week there was an announcement of someone going to this event, and it was remarkable. Q&As and everything, and I felt very out of my depth because science wasn't my strong point at school, so I was quite terrified for the Q&A. But the highlight of everything, as many people have heard before, was we accidentally stumbled upon a red carpet before it all happened. It wasn't meant to be one. I'd never been to one. Obviously, I've been to them all now, but I was able to very fortunately meet Christopher Nolan, Hans Zimmer, Jessica Chastain, and Michael Caine. It was a weird experience. I've never met famous people before. Similar to you, isn't it? You do your first ever convention, and it's like, whoa, like this is a new world. Then
People that you've seen on a screen like that are suddenly there in person, and
yeah,
you may have rehearsed things that you've wanted to say to those people all your life, but then when you're there in person, it just
different. This was the thing. So this is before I was even comfortable. I'd planned stuff, and obviously, also at the time, this was I was studying. How did you finish? I'd finished A levels. I was in my first year at uni. And this is the guy that put me on the journey, as I mentioned, to Dark Knight. This wasn't just like meeting anyone. This was Nolan. So there's a famous photo which is all over my social media as usual. I won't go into the story anymore, but the photo of me at the Royal Albert Hall is in the Albert Hall with the whole cast and crew. You see me in the background. But anyway, that's me talking. That I won't bring that up again, Chris. Except the church organ scene, which I have to. But I want to hear about yours.
Well, mine's not really much to write home about, to be honest. I just went to my local Odeon. I will say, like, before going in, there wasn't massive hype. It was more intrigue, which I think is kind of where you were coming at it from as well. I've always compared Nolan and certainly Tarantino, they're probably the two biggest filmmakers for me, to like your favorite band or something. Whenever they bring a new album out and you listen to it, it's like, oh, I can't wait. I wonder what they're going to do next in like a few years' time. So whenever you have that Nolan name attached to anything, you're hyped for ages, you go and see it, but then your mind's racing like, what are they going to do next? So after Dark Knight Rises, obviously we move into this one. And space, I think, was a good place for him to go. As you mentioned, like the fairly obvious links to 2001, A Space Odyssey, that the comparisons without question to that film. But I never went in with like mad hype for it. I went to see it. I only saw it once at my local cinema. I enjoyed it for what it was. I didn't think it was... Immediately, I knew that it wasn't in like my top 3 or anything like that. I did very much enjoy it. It was just kind of a standard film for me. I very much enjoyed it. I liked some of the performances in there. We'll get into those in a minute when we talk about characters in the film. There are some really good touching moments. You've got the, when the score kicks in, you have the really intense moments. But it wasn't one that I came out, say, like, Dark Knight or Inception, certainly, or, some of the other ones like that, perhaps, where I had to, as you mentioned, like, had to run out and, like the eureka moment at the end of the film and talk to the world about it and everything like that. I never really had that. It was quite understated, I think. And it didn't really get those multiple viewings from me. So I actually watched it, I think, for the 3rd time, beginning to end. I think I watched it right around the time it was released on so I went to see it when it came out, then I watched it again when it came out on DVD, and then I watched it again in the lead up for this thing. And I enjoyed it a lot more this time. Not to say that I ever disliked the film, but I picked up on a few little bits, and it was kind of like rediscovering it. It wasn't as fresh in my memory as a lot of the other ones are that I've watched many, many times. So it was almost like kind of rewatching it for the first time, albeit on a much smaller screen and not a very good sound system. So yeah, that was kind of my very uninspired first time watching the movie, I guess, really.
I want to bring what you mentioned. So you rewatched this in the build-up. So you've seen it 3 times. I'm 4. Same as you. I saw it twice at the cinema, once at the event, which was, I think, the week before the DVD came out. So it was like kind of 4-month gap window. And then just hadn't seen it until the cinemas reopened. Day 1 of Cineworld was inside of IMAX. I messaged you straight after the film. I said, the words were, and I'm happy to miss. I don't know what came over me. I just didn't stop crying. Except the fact I needed the loo for the last 30 minutes, and I felt like I was going to piss myself in the cinema. I'm very good at long films, but I don't know what happened. I don't know if it's an age thing. I enjoyed it a lot more this time. I mean, I enjoyed it at release, but it connected to me far more on an emotional level. Whether lockdown has anything to do with that, whether personal life has anything to do with that, it's a father-daughter film. I don't have a daughter, obviously. I know there's a lot of Nolan fans that they do say this is their favorite. Me and you are very much in the Inception Dark Knight mold. I think a lot of people are very much, when you think of the best two, I'd say about 3/4 will go with either of those two. But Interstellar is always the one that crops up if it's someone else, and they always explain their reasons. It's always very personal to them, which I completely get. So I'm not knocking it, and it's kind of it's one of the it made I think 695 million at the time in box office. It's gone up recently with lockdown, but it was like the only original film of the year in its top 10, which was incredible. And it was like 8th, which in this day and age you don't get original films. This isn't the kind of film I think everyone would flock to the cinema to see as well. But this is again off the back of Dark Knight Rises, off Inception, off Dark Knight. It was, what is Nolan going to do next? And I like the fact it had that reception, but it feels at Nolan's most mature point. So obviously we get to the Nolanisms and things like that later, but I think a big thing for this is what I heard the Q&A is that Hans Zimmer said that when he wrote the theme, because the music is as integral as the visuals for this film, I feel. Hans Zimmer said that when the idea was pitched to him, it was a father-son relationship in the film. Obviously, we'll get to Murph and Cooper later on. And at the time, I believe Chris Nolan's daughter was born around the point of pre-production. So he quickly switched it from father-son leads to father-daughter. And that influenced a lot more. And Hans Zimmer said he'd already written the theme, but Hans Zimmer said it works better for a father-daughter because he wrote it thinking of his daughter as well. And I think that's a big thing when we get into the characters, because I think the crux of this film is that sort of that family, that personal connection. Connection, not collection, different thing. And it does feel very mature for a Nolan film. It's still got everything you expect from a Nolan film, but I feel it could be his most mature work, I guess.
Yeah, I think that certainly in terms of like emotions with characters, this is not to say that that's ever been neglected in any of his films, but sometimes it's quite downplayed or it's told from like a very stark, distant kind of way. This seemed like a very personal, like the scenes that you get with like Cooper and young Murph at the beginning, for example, and then obviously the ones that are peppered throughout the film as well when she ages up. It feels a lot more emotional. I mean, you mentioned that you got emotional at it. I didn't cry. I got misty twice in the film. So, and I'm trying to think back at like some other Christopher Nolan films, and I don't think this isn't any like slight against him, but none have really sort of got me to that point in any of his other films that we've talked about. So I think that's something definitely to say for this thing, but we'll go into the plot for this in case anyone doesn't know. And it is a very, very standard plot on the surface, but as you said, there are a lot of Nolan puts his own spin on there. There are your mind-bending things in there. There are your very out there ideas, almost unfathomably huge ideas in this film. So the plot on the surface: a team of explorers travel through a wormhole in space in an attempt to ensure humanity's survival. That's your bare bones plot right there. Obviously, you throw in different displacements of time, and there's not really, could you say, I guess you could say non-linear storytelling, because when you get like the concept of time itself as like an extra dimension at the end, it all kind of, there's overlaps and everything like that. So it does get quite out there, and I can see a lot of people sort of losing track of this film. But I guess this sort of takes us on to the characters. So this is where sort of my negatives might creep in a little bit, and I think this is probably why it's not sort of up there in terms of my favorite Nolan films. I'll get the positives out of the way though first. Cooper is fantastic. I love Matthew McConaughey in this. He's a fantastic protagonist. He's probably one of my favorite protagonists out of all of Nolan's films. And as I just mentioned, his dynamic with young Murph, and really Murph throughout the entire film, is the crux, the emotional crux of this whole film. It really does tug at the heartstrings, and it is a really believable father-daughter relationship. The heartbreaking moments where, you know, he's trying to keep her spirits up, essentially saying, you know, I'm going off to save the world. And like, he's trying to be all plucky, like, hey, when I come back, we might be the same age. And then it kind of dawns on him like, oh God, we could be the same age, and the mission that he's going to embark on. That's all really, really great stuff. I think where this film falters for me, and it is a very long film, it is pushing 3 hours, so it is doing a lot of stuff. It has a lot of stuff that it has to cover. It's kind of with all the other characters. I think that Cooper and Murph are the strongest, but honestly, most of the other people just fall to the background. You have Anne Hathaway, I guess, but then the other two people, again, I don't even know their names. Like the other two people who are on the shuttle, we don't really get much with them or much characterization, much personality. One of them, spoiler alert, is killed off on the first planet, and I feel nothing because I don't know him. He's just kind of a background character, and I kind of feel like that through most of the film. You get like Casey Affleck as well, who is Cooper's son, you know, like he is the other one, and I don't really feel much for him or his family. It is very much a Cooper and Murph thing, and it's kind of, you are juggling all these characters. You've got John Lithgow's character, you've got the stuff going on with NASA, you've got a lot of auxiliary characters in the background, but I don't feel anything for them. And that's got to be a problem either with the writing or just the time dedicated to them, really. So I'd say that's probably one of my biggest negatives, and probably why I can't rank this one above a lot of other Nolan films, because of that disconnect there. With Inception, we talked about that as well, with the sheer volume of ensemble characters they have, but that is inherently part of the heist genre, where you have your main characters and everyone has what's the word I'm looking for, like certain skill sets, a particular set of skills. They all kind of stick to that throughout the whole film. There's no kind of excuse with this film to have that dynamic with them, and I think that's where it falters a little bit.
That's a good segue, because they are, in theory, ensemble cast still, but they're far more memorable as well as more important to the plot in Inception, and it feels the most risk. And obviously in this one, they are all scientists, and I don't fully, I mean, not that I don't understand, but one of them is very much there for the physics side of things. One of them is there. They each have their own why they're there, but it's not really clear as to why they're there. I mean, obviously they say it, but in terms of plot importance, the main one is Cooper, without a shadow of a doubt. This is what I mentioned. It's both a positive that the key focal point is Murph and Cooper, but when you have an ensemble cast, that's where it can lose it. And I think you mentioned Matthew McConaughey. You got to think at the time as well, he's just come off the back of True Detective. What were they calling it? The McConaissance or something like that. That there was a couple of years McConaughey was everywhere, and he was great in everything. He was in Dallas Buyers Club, Interstellar. He was on this incredible streak, and I think he was great. I think he's the best character in the film. Certainly, I know he is the lead. You do expect that to a point, but from the opening scenes, you know, he's this old school, I wanted to fly in the stars, not have this, the future he wants for his daughter. And you mentioned the daughter brother thing. From the get-go, he's like, yeah, my son's going to be a farmer. And you know, that's fine. The son's fine. And whereas Murph's like, she's going to be this, that, and everything. Even the leaving scenes, Murph has the whole bedroom scene, which is obviously great. It's obviously a humongous crux for the film. And with obviously a very young Timothée Chalamet, it's the sort of pat on the back scene of it. And it has a point, you know, he doesn't need to be as important. And the problem is, I think, when you get to the subplots of some of these supporting characters, that obviously you need adult Murph to solve the equation as well as older Murph for that final scene. But then with Casey Affleck taking over Timothée Chalamet, it's, you just don't feel anything. And you get the great scene, which we'll speak to later on the ship, where you do get some really good scenes with Timothée Chalamet and Casey Affleck on the video. But when you get to the mini subplot, like, I don't mean to sound horrible, I looked at this and just thought, he's a Trump supporter. Sorry to bring politics into it. It's, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, guys. They even tell them to put their masks on. They're in a similar pandemic, and you just have this arrogant sort of redneck that's refusing to attend to his wife and child who are clearly ill and dying, who goes as far to punch a doctor that wants to help them or something. And it's really hard not to look at today with it. And maybe that's one of the reasons why I had a weird traumatic experience in this film, that, you know, it was the whole like Earth's ending, apocalypse, blah, blah, blah. Obviously it's not happening in that sense here, as is a virus, not Earth running out of crops and things to feed people with, essentially. But yeah, I think the character, the thing is, you don't mind them, but you never learn enough to like them. And I think that's a big thing. Michael Caine's character you like, and obviously you get the betrayal, you get the villain theme that kicks in, that he solved the equation years and years ago, but he kind of had to play them, which, I'm not going to sit here, get into science. It's not my forte. I've said that once. You would have thought another astronaut at NASA might have realized that the equation had been solved by now. Because Matt Damon did, which is a very important segue, because I think it's worth bringing up right now the character of Dr. Mann. One of the biggest surprises, I will say, of modern cinema. I did not expect that bathtub to open and have Matt Damon sitting in it. I think everyone had a collective Matt Damon moment the first time they saw this.
Maybe not said in that exact same voice, but
it's what we're all thinking. Yeah. I did a bit of research before we went live today for this one, and apparently there was a rumor at the start of 2013 that, quote, Matt Damon may have a small role in the next Nolan film, but it was never confirmed casting. There was never set photos. There was never confirmation, nothing in marketing. And there's a great interview with Christopher Nolan where he mentioned that by bringing in Matt Damon, who's a very likable actor who plays very, very likable roles across the majority of his career, he's always been this kind of person that's been a plot point in terms of saving. And essentially, he's someone that you just naturally gravitate towards. And obviously the key with Dr. Mann was that he was the best of, as they say, he was the best of us. And you do have this belief that he was the best of them. And you see him get lost in his way and ultimately become the antagonist of the film. I think that's one of my, granted we don't get much with him, but on a repeat viewing, when you know that he's, when you know that Matt Damon is on his own and he's tricked them from the get-go, all his scenes are very good on a rewatch. I mean, they're great anyway, but that build-up is definitely there. And I think that's one of my favorite Nolan characters, maybe across all of his films. Granted, it's a very small role. I wouldn't say it's a cameo. I'd say it's above a cameo. But I think the Matt Damon stuff, it added a bit of, how do I describe it? Not excitement, because that's the wrong word, but from a very traditional...
It was intrigue, wasn't it, I guess?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and it's like misdirection that you've had this, very happy to say it's very slow paced as sci-fi films were, certainly in the sort of 60s. And then the moment Matt Damon comes in, the plot starts to kick in. And when you look at the breakdown of sequences, you get Matt Damon, then you get the docking sequence because of Matt Damon, then you get the portal, the library, the ending. Matt Damon's aspect really kickstarts the film into that climax level. And on reflection, I think after Murph and Coop, he is the best character, which maybe that's also a criticism that someone that's in it for 10 to 15 minutes can have that effect. It's both a positive, maybe it's a negative, but when they kill off the other scientist, you're like, that's a shame. Didn't know his name, though. And I don't know if I've jumped too far, but...
No. I was going to go on to Mann as well. But that one guy who dies on Miller, he's basically... You may as well just put him in a red shirt and just take him on the journey with you, there's absolutely nothing to him. Yes, Mann is definitely one of my favourite characters in the film. He's definitely the most interesting one for me, sort of psychologically, and what he's gone through that we get in drips and drabs of the information throughout the rest of the film. And on a rewatch, like when you first watch it, you're kind of like, oh, well, he's sort of like a pseudo antagonist kind of thing. He's, you're cheering for Cooper and he's like suffocating and everything. You want to see him survive. But watching it again, I was kind of on Mann's side all the way through. He was fed this lie. He knows that it's a lie. And he doesn't sort of want to leave humanity. He doesn't want to abandon humanity. Far from it. He wants to fight for humanity. He doesn't want to just be left on that planet to die. He quickly realized that as soon as he got to that planet and he sent off the distress signal, everyone else kind of went to, this is sort of like jumping to a weird thing, but it's like what what Dumbledore says in Harry Potter, like raise like pigs for slaughter kind of thing. Like they just sent them off there to their deaths. And he was having none of it, and he wanted to survive, and he had that will to survive, and I've got to respect him for that. He does kind of get very stupid when he tries to dock the ship, but it does lead to, we'll talk about favourite scenes later on, but I think that's probably going to be both of our favourite scenes, is that moment and the soundtrack. I love characters like that, and I'm forgetting the film that came out within the last couple of years. It was Brad Pitt and Tommy Lee Jones, the space movie that came out.
Ad Astra, from last year.
Ad Astra, thank you, yeah. And similar characters to that, where you have Tommy Lee Jones's character, where they only have a very, very small part in the film. They are kind of not an end goal, because I wouldn't say that Dr. Mann is an end goal in this, but he is a target. He goes like, we're going to go to that beacon where that distress thing's coming from. So he is central to the plot in that regard. But you get there and they've their minds just completely warped in their ideas and everything and what they want to achieve, and they're so dedicated to their vision and what they want to get done. He's a really fascinating character. He definitely leaves an impact with you during the film for a very short amount of screen time. And yeah, the fact that Matt Damon's in it is probably the best guarded secret out of any Nolan film that I can think of in recent memory. I remember being shocked when he showed up as well. His name's not on top of any of the posters. Big star as well, like he is I won't say he's like an A-lister or anything like that, but he's a prominent name. He can draw in a crowd. But yeah, the fact that they left him off all the posters, I thought was a really inspired choice.
I think as well, I completely forgot to say, you brought up when you mentioned the Ad Astra comparison. Christopher Nolan said that he was the Colonel Kurtz to what the film needed. And
yeah,
when I saw that, I was like, now I see it. And it just clicked for me. Obviously, it's very different to Prince of Darkness, and Apologies Now, but I just had that vibe that, okay, now that one explanation sums up everything you need to know about him. And it is this another dynamic. And it's what you mentioned. If you just slap Matt Damon on the posters, everyone would be like, new Matt Damon film, excellent. And then they'd be like, Matt Damon's not come into this and we're an hour and 40 minutes in. And then it would be, okay, something's obviously big's going to happen to him. And I think that could have took people out if they had prior knowledge he was in it. I just love the surprise element. And, we mentioned secrets are very tight on Nolan films. Obviously, we don't know anything about Wednesday yet for Tenet. Obviously, I don't remember too much the production of that, but Dark Knight, there were set videos of the factory being blown up, which was the hospital. Dark Knight Rises, we mentioned a video, the Tyler Al Ghul set photos. You had a lot of things go wrong, and Matt Damon, especially when they film on location, they're in Iceland, which is in a beautiful location, same location I think they did for Batman Begins.
Yeah,
and all it would have took is a local tourist boat, and Matt Damon's on a new Nolan film, and it's very clear when you do see set videos, 90% of the time it's shooting on location, which is what spoils it, because people start to notice the cast there because they're not in that Hollywood environment and studio environment of, we can hide you, we can put you in a car and drive you into a studio. No one will know you're here. But when you're on location, you're in the middle of nowhere. People will spot you. So I think they did very well to keep that out of reach, and that would have probably changed my experience heading into the film. But I also want to quickly bring Anne Hathaway. You kind of mentioned it too. Kind of cast-wise as well. We spoke about Dark Knight Rises having the Inception cast. Anne Hathaway and Michael Caine being the only two Nolan people returning. Personally, I think this film needed that. I'd love Inception. I love Rises. I know obviously we have differences in that. It's a very good review for those that didn't see it. If you'd have had the same cast come in again, I think 3 films in a row, the same cast maybe could feel a bit too much. This is this person playing this role. And I think by bringing only sort of one person, Michael Caine doesn't really count as bringing him back because he's the sort of standard. He will always be there. But with Anne Hathaway coming back and being obviously a very, very different character to what she was in Batman, in Dark Knight Rises, whereas you got Gordon Levitt, who went from Arthur in Inception to kind of the same thing with John Blake. I think this did help in so that you had primarily a very new cast. We say the same thing about Dunkirk and hopefully about Tenet, that I love seeing these recurring people. Some directors at their best with other actors, but if you bring everyone back every film, it can be a bit too on the nose. I always think of Tom Hanks and Spielberg. Tom Hanks will always play the same role in every film, and sometimes it's not a criticism, but it is. He's a great actor. He's a great guy, but you can look at that and think, I know what's going to happen in this character arc because it's happened 10 times in the past. Ironically, this film is essentially trying to save Matt Damon for the 10th film, probably in as many years. Obviously, The Martian came out shortly after. But yeah, the cast on this, it's, compared to his other films, I think they're all cast okay, but there is key strength in 2 of them, and that is the crux of the film is Murph and Cooper.
Yeah, I think it's so going back to Anne Hathaway, I'm thinking, could you have just shrunk the main crew down to just sort of Matthew McConaughey, her, and I wanted to talk about Tars as well, the robot, voiced and puppeted by Bill Irwin. He's one of my favorite characters. He gets some really fun, quippy, deadpan lines in there, which I really appreciated. It's kind of like a HAL 9000 kind of thing, like the deadpan robot, but probably not as villainous as that one and doesn't want to kill them all. But I don't know. I guess you need to make the numbers up, don't you, in terms of a crew on this mission. So I don't know. I think they could have just expanded their roles a little bit there. I like Anne Hathaway in the film. After a certain point, she does kind of bomb off and do her own thing, and the focus definitely sort of comes back to Cooper at the end, which it probably has to. She kind of serves her role and then gets a little brief bit in the epilogue at the very end of the film. I like the turmoil that the character goes through, because you can understand where she's coming from. You know, she's got this long lost love who we never see. We never see them together or anything like that. So I guess that could also be maybe a disconnect there, where you don't really feel that connection. When Cooper wants to get back to Murph and like every second counts and years are going past, like you feel that, like you want him to get back in as little time as possible. When she's just talking about like, oh, I loved one of the scientists who flew to one of the other planets, it's like, okay, great, but yeah, we haven't seen it. We don't have that connection to it. But I guess you can understand the human connection, and that she makes a really bad call when they go to Miller Planet. Costs them, yeah, I think 23 years or something like that she costs them. And she has to live with that. And when I like that moment where they're all deciding on which planet they should go to next, they've got two other possibles. One where you've got, well, they don't know at the time, Matt Damon's beacon's coming from there. They don't know whether he's alive or dead, but it is a beacon. And the other one's just a complete shot in the dark. Could it be exactly the same situation as the other one? And she's arguing her case. You know, she's got someone there she loves that she wants to get back to. But you kind of feel that, like, it's like, shut up, you made a bad call, go in your naughty step, like let the guys talk here, we're going to come up with like another situation. But you believe it, and it's a very difficult situation to know who to side with, because I tend to side with McConaughey, because I kind of still feel bitter for what happened, although he says it's not personal. Whether he's lying with that, we don't really know, but I guess that does definitely have an effect on his decision at that point. But also I kind of see it from her one as well, that she's got someone she cares about, who we see at the end of the film she does get back to, although it's implied, well, there's a gravestone at the end, isn't he, that he is dead.
I love this bit you mentioned, because the really big thing is, this again goes back to Matt Damon's character of Dr. Mann, that she does want to go to Mann's planet, and Matthew McConaughey says, you know, you told me he is the best of us. He was the best of everyone on that journey. He led that mission. He's the best scientist NASA have. So why wouldn't they go to his planet? And in that situation, you'd very much be on Matthew McConaughey's side. It's the whole unconscious bias thing, where Matthew McConaughey's worked out she's got the love interest, but the other scientist hasn't. And the moment that gets brought up, the other scientist, you know, he's going to vote to go to Matt Damon's. But now you get the whole power. I call it the power of love speech. It's not one of my favorite speeches from a Nolan film. I think it's a very polite way of putting that. And ultimately, obviously, what he does decide with the film is that was the planet to go to after all of that. That was the place to be. And it's not to be like a student essay that, you know, love is always right and all that sort of thing. But as these guys are scientists on a ship on a mission to save what's left of mankind, a decision had to be made, as they always shout in Rogue One. And it made right sense to go to Matt Damon's planet, which ultimately was the wrong choice. But that is probably how 90% of people would have made that decision in a similar circumstance.
It's almost like one of those video games where you decide on the outcome, and it's like Anne Hathaway will remember that or something at the top of the screen when you make a decision. But no, so I love those dilemmas there where they are, and those are some of the best bits with the supporting cast on the crew as well, who I mentioned don't really get maybe more scenes like that where they're talking about things. It's already a very long film again, so maybe it would have dragged. I do think the pacing of this film in some parts, especially towards the end, and then you've got like the whole Topher Grace stuff going, I don't care about it. You know, there's like a ticking clock in reality in space, but then also on Earth as well, and you just don't really care about it. So I do think that the running, it does drag a little bit on the ending for me. It's like, okay, come on, let's wrap this up now. I get the gist of where you're going with it. I guess, so you mentioned the power of love speech, and that's going to be another one of my negatives. I have two negatives, including this one. The script, for the most part, is great, but there are some parts where it is so ham-fisted, and they are just pounding that message into you, and it's about as subtle as a sledgehammer. It's like, I get it. Less is more. I understand what you're trying to say, but it's almost like Ewan McGregor's line from Moulin Rouge when Anne Hathaway just starts going on. It's like, love is like oxygen. Love is a many splendid thing. All you need is love. You know, love is all around. And it's like every cheesy song name and song lyric you can think of. And it's a nice message. I get what she's saying, that, you know, they can be worlds apart through wormholes, but her connection that she still has to that person is still there. That hasn't gone anywhere. It's a nice concept, but I do think that it's not treated very subtly. And that kind of takes me on to the ending as well, where you get into like the prism of time the dimension that Cooper finds himself in. Very 2001. That's probably one of my biggest comparisons there, where you go through the whole I forgot what you call it, the very end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, where he flies through the Technicolor light thing. And it's like, I get what you're trying to do, and it plays. That was actually one of my biggest things. So again, this is going to sound like ego, maybe a little bit, kind of like the whole Inception thing, but from very early on, when the books were falling off the bookshelf and it's like they're trying to communicate, I did guess. I was like, well, I bet that's going to be him when he goes through later. When they like talk about time and wormholes and everything, I was like, oh, that will have been, them sending a message back somehow. And it's fairly obvious with like stay as the message, but then the whole ending drags on for like this big 10 or more minute reveal. Like, it was me sending the message the whole time. I was the one sending the message stay. And he's having to punch each letter in. And it's like, gravity transcends, which means I can send a message back through time. I'm like, I get it. It feels like Nolan or Jonathan Nolan are like treating it as this big dramatic reveal. Like, oh my God, I couldn't imagine the movie would go in this direction. And I actually found it a very predictable ending. I don't know about you. I don't know if you had the same thing when you first saw it.
I didn't, but I really should have seen it coming, which I think is the most obvious thing. It's very obvious in
where she reaches out as well, Anne Hathaway, and you get like the kind of glitch thing. I was like, oh well, that's going to be them in like another timeline or something.
So the first time I remember watching this was when he drops in, and I was like, oh, this is I love the design. It's worth mentioning as well. So this film is very quick before I get into it. This film is very scientifically accurate. I'm talking. So they brought in Kip Thorne, who's a famous, I think, physicist. And he wrote a book for this film. He worked with Nolan throughout the entirety of production. Everything from the black hole concept and everything is way out of my league. And I just sat there in this Q&A like, I've got no idea what's being said. Until the library bookcase bit, Nolan kind of said that this is as scientifically accurate as we can have it. And then we get the library bit, which is obviously the film side of it, the dramatic kind. This is the Murph and Cooper dynamic. And I remember that. I wasn't that disappointed with that, but that kind of hits to me a lot more now that you have this. I'm not going to say it's perfectly accurate because we don't know what a black hole would be like. No one can fly through them. We'll never know. But the way in which you get in that, they're traveling back in and it drops in. And it's, again, you mentioned the 2001 comparison. It's I don't have an effing clue what's going on. And that's a very common sci-fi trope. I'm not saying it was written in there for that at all. I think there's purpose with the messages, the letters, the numbers, the formula on the watch, and I adore the scene. But that to me is because of the Hans Zimmer score, which I haven't actually given a subsection to, which we will. It doesn't take me out, and I love getting to it, but it does add noticeable time. I think that's more a trope of the sci-fi genre more than anything. Because in these days, we think of sci-fi, we think of Star Wars, Flash Gordon, all these things that have come since. But this is how it always used to be. It'd be these longer, slower films, and you just have everything hit you at 100 miles per hour, and then it goes back to what it was at the beginning of the film. You get the slow burn, and it happens in this scene. I like the scene, but I completely understand because there's been a lot of criticism of the scene as well. I think this can split people. It's fascinating with these Tenet reviews to go on a kind of side swipe. Interstellar sits at 72% of Rotten Tomatoes, which astounds me. But I think that scene loses a lot of people because it does go from this very serious science thing to ghoul in a bookcase. Do you know what I mean? And I can see why that does take people out. And I think it works for obviously how humanity can escape. But the thing that intrigued me more is they call it, this is what I noticed in the latest review, they call it the fifth dimension, but that was plotted in the future. But I'm assuming that's the future as in planet Earth has moved now. Planet Earth's, closed for the day. They've gone to a new planet. I don't know. I'm more intrigued to see how the bookcase came to be. But, sometimes we're intrigued by things you don't need to know the answers because that's how awful prequel films get made. Not that we'd ever get one for this. But,
well, they talk about like they have done this for us, the ent or whatever they call them.
I assume it's the humans in the future.
Well, he does say at the end, doesn't he? So, like when they first said that, I was like, your brain goes to what? Aliens? Is it going to be like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the space between space, interdimensional beings, or whatever ungodly, unholy creation George Lucas came up for that film? But no, he just says basically it's humans have created this. He says not in our lifetime. We don't understand time, but time is an actual physical dimension for these people. It could be in like 10,000 years time or something like that, if humans are still around, have created this thing, so I don't mind the concept of it. I'm fine with like out there sci-fi, even in a film that's otherwise particularly grounded. It's mostly just the fact that it's bigged up as such a massive reveal, and like a massive twist when it doesn't earn that for me at all. And it goes on for quite a while as well. And the screenwriting in that part in particular, the whole topic about love, it's basically Cooper's just narrating the whole thing and talking down to the audience. And I don't know, sometimes with sci-fi, I'm thinking of, is it Annihilation? Yeah, Annihilation, the Netflix movie that came out with Natalie Portman. The kind of sci-fi you get towards the end of that, which is still stays in my mind, the really out there, subtle stuff, the stuff that makes you scratch your head, but sometimes less is more. And I think 2001: A Space Odyssey nails that, where you do have that kind of scene after scene towards the end of that film where you can have like 1,000,001 readings of what that ending sequence means and when it all unravels and everything, and you're picking it apart. This one's just kind of telling you matter of fact, literal sentence after sentence, and I don't know, that kind of takes me out. The only other negative that I can think of for this film, and I did notice this more on another viewing as well, I never really feel the effects of the futile state that Earth's in.
Yeah,
I never sort of get that greater sweeping sense that, I'm actually more invested in a father getting back to his daughter before she dies. That's where, but this whole, you need to save humanity, Cooper, you're our last hope, humanity's like on its last dying breath. I never really get that sense, because we mostly just stay at a farmhouse and you get like the occasional sandstorm. And even years in the future after he leaves, like 20 odd years or whatever, where we get Casey Affleck, it still kind of looks like exactly the same status quo as it was when he first left. So there's no progression. They talk about, they've got coughs and like chest problems and things like that, but it never really goes past that. No one seems like they're in complete dire straits. We don't really get a sense of what's it like internationally, as some places worse than others. So I think this would have been a good opportunity to sort of go worldwide, or in those 23 years, see the massive drop off that they've had. They talk about that corn's dying, but then again, in like 2 decades, they're still managing just fine. They don't look weary or anything like that. So it makes me have that disconnect. I don't sort of get as invested in the peril or the tension of what we're doing right now is saving humanity. And I think because that's the crux of the movie and the main plot, I do think that is a negative on Nolan's part for not showing that widespread scale of what's happening with the world.
That's what I like. You get little hints of it, and it's more an exposition, which doesn't help sometimes. And I think, to me, as we kind of said, it's the same thing you said at the start of that point, is that you're invested in Murph and Cooper, not the mankind stuff. And I know that shrunken down people will say, this is an emotional thing between the two. It's like, we understand it's an emotional thing between the two of them, but we need to see why he needs to leave. And it's the kind of the coordinates and the NASA base, they scrapped funding us, and I don't think you get the stakes. It's right. As some of my least favorite stuff is, I like Jessica Chastain in it, but it's the subplot with Casey Affleck I don't like. With Topher Grace, the fire. I know she won't save her family. She's fine. She's fine as a character. But when you've got, I call it the coward scene because that's the name of the song. When you've got everything happening on Mann planet with the ice, the build up, something's not right, something's going to happen. And then they're cutting to Earth in between, and it's kind of like, no, like get back to the ice planet. Like I need to see what's happening there, not here. And there's some great editing in those scenes, how they want to do it, but the core of it is following Cooper getting back to Earth, and I don't think you get the weight of Earth. You get Michael Caine's passing, which is a very big bit, but I'm not invested in the Casey Affleck stuff, which is a shame because he is there, but from the first couple of minutes, you kind of realize that he cares more about Murph than Timothy Chalamet. I don't even know the name. That's my fault for not reading it.
That's what I mean.
And also, hindsight very different. But I see a lot of Timothy Chalamet fans moaning about his role, and a lot of Casey Affleck fans. They're both very, very, very good actors. But at the end of the day, it's.
I don't think they're given that much. I don't think they're
not given much to do. Yeah, and I do think that the father-daughter dynamic works than a father-son, because the father-son space dynamic has been done so many times, and it does work great. I was invested in Al Astra, but the father-daughter, something we haven't really had before, certainly in sci-fi films, and I think that gave it a completely different edge, which I think affected how I was getting overly emotional during that. Again, I don't have a child, so I don't know how I get like that. But yeah, one thing I want to speak about, screenwriting you mentioned. I don't want to harp onto this too long. People at home, this was originally I should have said this at the beginning, this was originally a Spielberg film. Jonathan Nolan wrote Interstellar with Spielberg attached to direct it.
I can see that. I think, yeah, the Spielbergisms, absolutely.
There is a very long treatment on the internet, not a script. There is a very long treatment. If you type in denofgeek.com and then search up for an Interstellar original treatment, they have the Spielberg's treatment, and it was very much a father-son going out to save mankind. They would go to a planet and they would fail there. The planet's inhabitable. They'd go to the next planet, and they would meet an ex-space survivor who would go on to betray them, but it was seen more as a journey to the center of the Earth vibe film rather than obviously the sort of Nolan type film you get. And it's a really fascinating read, because obviously this is an original Jonathan Nolan script, and Spielberg. I mean, the problem with Spielberg is, and I saw this on Twitter yesterday actually, someone praised Nolan saying the best thing about Christopher Nolan is he gets attached to one film, he makes the bloody film. He doesn't announce he's directing 8 films across like 10 years. And I love Spielberg, but there's always a dozen things in development that he's working on, and we know that he won't do 3/4 of them, which is a shame. And that's where I think the crux of this comes in, that obviously Spielberg doesn't do it. And rather than have this adventure and go trace, obviously we know how good the duo dynamic is of Christopher Jonathan Nolan. Obviously Jonathan goes to his brother, says, I'm sure Chris Nolan knew what it was about anyway. And he just said, Chris Nolan probably said, I'll do it. And obviously he rewrites it with him. He puts his stamp on it. As we said, he changes Murph into a girl from a guy. He obviously makes this, I don't want to say the stakes higher, but it's definitely not Spielberg. You can tell this is a Nolan film watching it, and you can tell that it was a Spielberg film from the original treatment. Planet One, the mountain planet, is everything you'd expect from Nolan film. It's a big twist. It's this, the whole time element, the science element. We knew we wouldn't have had that in a Spielberg film. So I think that is worth bringing up, and that's worth researching, because I could go on. But I'd been very intrigued in a parallel universe to see how Spielberg did this. But
I can almost see that film, and the tone changed. It would have been, you'd have had more of the whimsical side to it, I think. Well, maybe not whimsical, but
the beauty of space, wouldn't it, rather than the fear of space. And
John Williams would have done the soundtrack for it, obviously.
Yeah, which is a great segue. Let's talk soundtrack quickly. It does time to scenes. To me, this is one of Hans Zimmer's best soundtracks. He didn't win an Oscar for this. Now, this is interesting. I don't think this is a better soundtrack than Inception. However, emotionally, I am more tied to this soundtrack than any of his other work. That's, I think, for the placement of the songs in the scenes, the variation of Zimmer's tempo in this as well is, I think, different to anything he's ever done. Obviously, I do prefer Inception, but I think Interstellar is a massively underrated score. I say underrated, people love it. It's got a fantastic theme, sub-themes and everything.
It's nominated as well for an Academy.
Yeah, and this just goes under the radar because of Inception, which is, the fact that many musicians can make something of that caliber and do one like this. I think that was worth mentioning because the experience is enhanced due to that score.
Yeah, no, and listening to it again, it definitely has that underlying layer to the film. It doesn't always filter into the background. It definitely does become forefront. And actually, one of the things I was going to talk about is the audio mix into this film. So when I went to see this film at the cinema, I thought maybe it was just like dodgy speakers or something, but I actually struggled on my Blu-ray towards the end. The music's like competing with dialogue in the film. I noticed it's like they crank the music up so high and they're trying to like audio gain the voices, and sometimes lines get lost and I don't really hear what they're saying. Luckily, I have the option of subtitles now when I was watching this thing on Blu-ray. But certainly towards the end as well, I'd say the ending montage, you can almost hear like the gain on the audio for old Murph's dialogue trying to get above the music. But the music itself is fantastic. I think it sounds very different, as you mentioned, to a lot of other Hans Zimmer scores, is precisely for like the instruments that he chose. Like the organ is a huge, just monstrous sound to it and goes really, really well with space. And it's a sound that we haven't really heard from Zimmer before or after this point. So it is quite a unique score in that way. When the exciting moments, and he uses the sound of like the ticking time, which really, really adds to that sense of urgency. I'm thinking of Miller Planet, for example, where the waves getting closer and closer, and you've got that tick, 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 tick kind of sound in the. I don't think he really used that. I'm trying to think. Did he have any kind of clock kind of mechanics in Inception before this one? I know he does in Dunkirk. That's like the focal thing in the soundtrack for Dunkirk. But I'm trying to think if he had it for Inception in any points.
Not too much. Inception's more slowing down, I think, the Edith Piaf song and turn it into a soundtrack. With this one, the tick is.
Isn't there an Inception? Like there's a rhythm to it, which sort of adds to that. But in terms of the ticking, I think it's probably this Dunkirk.
The tick for this is what I found out only a couple of months ago. In the mountain scene, the tick begins the moment they land on the planet. Each tick is 1 day on Earth. That is because obviously
I didn't know that.
We find out they're there for 3.5 hours. Obviously, we don't get them on Earth on there for 3.5 hours, but apparently, I'm not going to say I've researched it. I've seen this interviews, but it is led to believe across many social medias that they worked out a time thing, and 1 tick is 1 day on Earth, which is something I went into this film. And I just, again, it's a kind of Zimmer thing. We'll talk about, obviously, time in Dunkirk a lot in the ticking, but this one, that blew me away because I never thought that. I just loved it. It felt like tension having the ticks. And I know that's a nice segue to some of our favourite scenes.
You want to kick off with some?
First time watching this, and I don't know if this is my favourite scene. From a spectacle point, absolutely. No, maybe it's joint second. I don't know. The whole mountain scene.
Mm-hmm.
First time I watched this film, and then something's not right. The beacon's gone off, and there's a wreckage, and you're like, this is, they said this planet's habitable, and then it clicks that it was minutes. She had been there for minutes, and it killed her. And because minutes there are X amount on time on Earth, I remember having this sort of Hans Zimmer Bois moment, like jaw dropping, like, oh my god, what's happened? And then I always call it the mountains because it's on the soundtrack, because they say, oh no, they're not mountains in the background, and then insert the Hans Zimmer Bois of Bois. It's not a mountain, it's the wave, and it's a couple of minutes long. As you said, you lose the character that no one knows anything about. I think he's in the Hunger Games and Ghost Rider. Wes Bentley's not in much, but you don't care that he dies. Love the designer Tars, that he's versatile, that he does the spinning trick to save her.
He seems to take a while to do that, though. I was noticing when I was rewatching it. She gets trapped, and he's like, time's going past. It's like, hurry, hurry. Then he's just like Transformer, and then he just grabs her, and it's no problem. I'm like, why couldn't you have done that at first?
And like, the trooper tells him, the thing that always gets me, this, sorry to talk about Star Wars, but the ship they're in looks beautifully like a snow speeder.
Mm-hmm.
You can tell it's a model. You can tell it's as practical as they could have made it. And I put a GIF on our social medias of it earlier. It looks like a snow speeder in the Hoff scenes. But that whole scene, the tension, the fact that the engines get flooded, and then they say they're down there for a couple of hours, and you can feel the pain in Matthew McConaughey. I think he likes kicking the wall. And it's the bit that hits me. I don't know if it's taking the next scene, but when they go back up to the ship and they age up the other guy, that's when you know, oh my word, there's a colossal mistake. And then there's losing 23 years to Earth. And obviously, segueing on, I'll let you talk about the mountain after if you want to. Mm-hmm. Directly after this, you, of course, get the video message. It was an incredible experience watching this recently, because you could hear a lot of people crying, myself included, the moment he takes the seat. Not start watching them, not anything. The camera cuts, you know what scene it is, and you can just hear people starting to cry already. And I was completely lost in it. And then the scene happens, you get the smile, the wave, the tears, and I just couldn't control it. To me, I've never seen of course, we've seen fantastic performances. McConaughey's great, but I don't think I've ever seen a performance in a scene as to that point. You get certainly great actors of all eras doing great scenes and stuff, but I think it's the fact that he's watched his family grow up 23 years in 3 minutes. It's a very powerful thing. And I always lose myself on that. I know I've kind of spoke about two of my favourite scenes there, but they're sort of back to back.
Yeah, no, I'll go back briefly, talk about the water one. So I think it goes back to that. If they'd have just really played up the stakes at home on Earth in terms of the dire straits that they were in, I think that, oh my God, the water planet would have just blew my mind. Like, as it is, it's kind of, you with it in just from a time perspective. He says like, what are we waiting for? Come on, let's get out of there. Let's get what we need to do. Come on, let's hurry, hurry, hurry. Let's get this done. And it's not just that bit, but it's where they get caught in the wave and they just can't get out of it. And it's just going and going and going, and they can't lift off. They can't take off. And you're conscious of time, that it's still going, and that they're wasted so much. It was weird how he says that the engine's flooded. It's going to take like an hour to deflood it, but then there's like a 5-minute conversation, and then he says like, "Oh, we're back to normal now," because it doesn't seem like there's like been a big span of time. So I was like, is that an hour on Earth time? So it's only like a certain. I don't know. I thought that was a little bit weird there, but that is one of my favorite scenes, and it's a good sort of action. There needed to be an action beat there in terms of the actual structure of the movie, and it's a really effective one, and adds on to the. And it's nice that it's an action scene that actually has a point. It's not just there for spectacle. It does, as you mentioned, it reinforces the gap of time. And then the most emotional scene in the movie, I'd say, didn't make me cry. It did get me misty, though. And I think that it is probably the most emotional in terms of getting you to that place scene in any Nolan film. I guess with Dunkirk as well, you kind of have like the overwhelming thing at the end of we'll get onto this in our next review. I don't want to talk too much about it, but what do you see? Home. That always gets me. That's a British thing, I guess, or if you know anyone who's or soldiers or whatever. But in terms of like the actual emotional connection to characters in the film, I think this is the part where Nolan really excels with this film, with this scene in particular. You could almost take this scene in isolation, and I think it would still have a lot of impact, because it's almost like a short film, really. The scene just plays out, and you're with Cooper in those moments, and you're experiencing everything that he is. And McConaughey just kind of goes through every single human emotion possible in the span of 3 minutes. It's a beautiful performance. And then I also kind of had a similar effect to that, where I got misty at the very, very end of the film, where she's, on a deathbed and she's super aged up. And it's all from the one line. It's the one line that almost broke me both times. It's the fact in the first one where she still feels bitter of him leaving at the very young age, and she never sent a video message, and he's always like waiting for Murph's message and he never gets one. And then all of a sudden she comes on screen, Jessica Chastain. She says, the only reason I'm doing one today, because it's a very special day. It's my birthday. It's not just any birthday. We're the same age now. And you'd said that you would be back on this birthday. And she kind of cracks, and her voice cracks, and she's wiping away tears. And I'm almost wiping away tears. Almost, not quite, but almost. And then it's the bit where that line's paid off at the very end of the film, where she says, I knew you'd come back because my dad promised me. And I'm like, oh, there it is.
I ruined that in a meme this week, didn't I? With the it's, and that's the thing, and it's interesting because we mentioned earlier that Nolan doesn't do emotion, but it's a very personal film, this one. And I don't think we've had anything like that in any of his. We've had antagonists, protagonists we love, we adore, we're attached to, but we haven't had the journey with them, I think is the appropriate word. Mm-hmm. And I think it was such a different thing that I didn't expect, and I was overwhelmed by. I want to quickly also bring up I know the scene you mentioned as well. I've got two more. We'll get to the big one at the end, the main one. Mm-hmm. When he leaves Murph to go on the trip, you get the stay scene, which gets me crying. I cried a lot at that point. And it's the car. I remember it from the trailer. And whenever the song comes on Spotify and in my car, I automatically go into one wheel mode. I don't have a blanket on my left to look at to check there's not a human there. But that's so the whole scene, the editing, and then edits him going off on the landing as well. It doesn't need a let's suit up, let's meet the crew. It's car, space, let's go. But it's so well edited in between. And of course, again, all these scenes have Hans Zimmer's music to emphasize them. I want to talk about that, and then do we get to do you have anything else before the big one?
I was going to say, it sounds cliched, but I'm not lying when I say, when I rewatch the film, the bit where he leaves and it's offset with the takeoff scene, I got goosebumps, both arms. It was a real thing. It happened. It was the music when it swells and it kicks in. And yeah, it's that moment where he looks down and lifts it up and she's not there. And I like that you mentioned there about the editing, because I think that this is a very, very well edited movie, but there's certain scenes in there where you become conscious of the editing, not in a bad way where it takes you out of it, but where you see the kind of purpose of it. And I think that it was a really good choice not to show like any kind of suiting up scene or any sort of like discussion with them beforehand before taking off, because the way that it's structured, it gives the impression, which of course it would be for the character of Cooper, that all the way up until the launch, that moment was the thing that was on his mind. So offsetting that moment there, it's like he's still reliving that moment in his head all the way up to actually getting back to the launch, you know, the whole process of it. He's still thinking about that moment of leaving Mirth, and it hasn't left him. So I thought that was a really good choice in terms of the editing. But yeah, probably number one scene. Here we go. It's the docking scene. It's the best bit of spectacle in the entire film. The soundtrack is just going 10 to the dozen. It's just beautiful. It's amazing. And an audio jump scare at the very end as well. Well, actually beforehand, sorry, where Mann gets blown out into space. Beautiful use of sound in this film. Not so much where the music's trying to compete with the audio. That's not so good. But the moments where silence is just as powerful as actual volume, and it's mixed and matched perfectly throughout the film, especially in this docking scene.
The docking scene is the jump scare gets me every time.
Yeah,
and
same.
I think I'm trying now to trace it down, that it's the fact that it's so obvious. But I think I said to you a couple of weeks ago, I think it's the angle of the jump scare that gets me, that it's not boom middle. It's not let's shrink in. It's kind of coming from like a corner that rips across. But you know it's coming. And you mentioned, I'm glad you brought up silence. That's a very big thing. Obviously, you know, we love Star Wars, but you want to get scientifically accurate about Star Wars films, people, there is no sound in space. I do like films when they do this because it's very real. It makes things more intimidating. And you just get the sort of, like, it's like a vacuum pop, isn't it? Of Matt Damon disintegrating, vacuuming off. And I sent you a great GIF last night, and it's the Vince McMahon reaction. Anyone at home, type in Interstellar Vince McMahon GIF. It's one of the best known set pieces. It's one of Hans Zimmer's greatest things. It's kind of sort of Hans Zimmer. It's like a challenge, isn't it? Like, how are the visual effects team going to take on Hans Zimmer? Like, who can have the best? It's like a direct battle, like department to department. And it's just an incredible scene. You feel the tension. You get kind of not goosebumps, but when she says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Docking." You're like, "Yes, let's do this." I absolutely adore it. You can tell it's models as well. The way it ripped off. We kind of spoke about that in Batman Begins review, that when the Batmobiles ripping off buildings, it's the things that make it more real is the tiny bricks that are falling off and the rubble, not the big explosions. It's the little things, the debris. And this does it so well. It's a phenomenal scene. Bringing up the Albert Hall thing again. Hans Zimmer said that the reason he picked that over Inception was because the film had just come out, and the Royal Albert Hall, that you've been many times as well, it has some of the best sound. The way the building is done, the way it's built is engineered for sound. And he said it's got the best church organ in the country. And he said he could not take on a film there and it not have that scene. And in that screening, there's a video of it on YouTube which someone recorded who shouldn't have. It has the docking sequence, and there is a standing ovation because it's essentially a solo. It's literally the church organs has a solo. He got a bigger clap than Hans Zimmer did at the end of the film, purely, well, not just that scene, many of them, but I like the fact that Hans Zimmer reinforced how important that sound was. And it's not something we get in many films. It's a very specific instrument, but I think it worked so well for this one. And again, that's the great thing with Zimmer, that his, you know, obviously we'll get to Dunkirk in terms of differing soundtracks. I think Nolan really brings out the best of Hans Zimmer and what he's capable of. You know, we kind of laugh and joke that some of his film scores sound the same as his other ones, but when you get to the Nolan ones, each one does feel different. It doesn't have that repetitiveness. And I think this absolutely smashed it. And that scene is the perfect demonstration of that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't have anything else to add to that scene. You've basically voiced my exact thoughts on it as well. We should talk a little bit about the Nolanisms as well. And I've actually been while you were talking about that, whilst I was still listening, I was trying to rack my brain as to what Nolanisms are in this film. So I think we've kind of mentioned these in some of our earlier reviews. I think that the Nolanisms that I can think of are the trying to get back to one's kids. It's basically like Inception, you know, getting back to one's family. There's a sort of ticking clock, race against time, similar to Inception, similar to elements in The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight Rises, the fact that, well, I mean, that is like a 5-month ticking time bomb, isn't it, essentially? So there's dire straits there. You could argue maybe the non-linear storytelling, although I think that's lesser somewhat in this one. They're really the ones that I can think of. I don't know if you've got any more from this one.
A big one for me is you don't really get the narrative, but what I like is the cutbacks in between. You get what I was going to say, more so when you get the scene of Matthew McConaughey watching the flashbacks. It's when you get it cuts, but it feels like you're in a TV studio because it cuts to Murph's side, and you get this kind of, it just goes with it. And not necessarily a nolism, but it feels something quite tight that he would have wanted to have done. And it feels that you're getting rather than alternative narrative, I guess alternative timeline, and it's the way he sort of edits them between each other. It feels like a Nolan film at that point. I think the big thing for me is the planet scene. I wouldn't say it's a big plot twist, but it's the kind of a Nolan set piece you'd expect, and a boring, obvious one is shooting on location. Mm-hmm. You know, he's in Iceland filming a lot of this. He goes everywhere he can go, and obviously, I mentioned it's got the Batman Begins vibe. I think it may even be the same. I don't know how you pronounce it, Glacier. I think
Yeah.
It's the same part of Iceland, which I'd love to go to one day. It's a country I've always wanted to go to. I think that feels very Nolan. And what I also want to touch upon, green screens. So in this film, the projections. So when they're shooting the space scenes, rather than have them in a green screen studio, Nolan had them. He had space projections put on the walls, and he said that this is for the actors to enhance with the environment, to help the performances. This is something that Kathleen Kennedy in Star Wars looked at, and they even said, reference for Interstellar, that the idea of them to have projections on the walls to help the actors act, rather than have them staring out of a cockpit window into a green screen. I think that feels very much Nolan-esque. Not too many. It feels very much like a Christopher Nolan film.
There's the compounding of time as well. I don't know if you've already mentioned that one, where with Inception, the lower you go down in the dreams, it compounds to where does it's like 80 years or something. It's decades essentially on the last dream level. You kind of have the same thing in this, where obviously when you go through the wormhole and you go to Miller Planet, was it? Oh God, this was one of our questions on the quiz. 7 years for 1 hour on this planet.
That feels very Nolan-y, doesn't it? It's the
oh God.
Yeah. So I think that's a big thing. I don't, and obviously the ending montage, which we spoke about, it's got its own 7-minute score. It's the ending. It feels like it feels more like the Dark Knight Rises one than any of the others. You've got like here's 4 or 5 different character arcs ending all together. You've got the score bombing. We get it a little bit in Dunkirk. We get it in some of his other films. So this feels as much a Nolan film as Inception. But certainly what this feels like is Nolan putting his stamp on. We know obviously that this is his brother's script and he worked on it after his brother had done a draft, but it doesn't feel like an Inception or a Tenet off the trailers and marketing, that this is the film that we know has come from his mind and only his mind. And that's how we go into a lot of his work. But this one very much feels like Nolan's put his stamp on someone's idea and concept. So I think that's also a good thing. It's not a criticism, but I see that angle of it, that this was his take. That's a Nolanism as such. Dark Knight Trilogy, he doesn't own DC, but DC this is my version of Batman. And I look at this as, this was my version of Interstellar, because for many Spielberg projects that don't get past, I guarantee you 90% of filmmakers will just do whatever they thought Spielberg would have done. Whereas this one feels like, no, I'm not going to do Spielberg's film. I'm going to do my own with my brother's story and script. So I guess there's that to it. But except for that, I don't have too many others.
No, I can't think of any more. I was going to go on to my final thoughts, unless you can think of any more. But I think we've pretty much said all of the ones we can. We've got some comments, which I think we should read some out. Actually, we've had some very good comments. We'll get to those just after we give our final thoughts in just a second.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't know. Sorry. I was meant to bring Iris's first. All I know about this movie is that I was able to meet the cast and director at the premiere in London by chance while I was going to a club. Very envious. It's a great cast. It's one of his best casts, I think, in terms of performances. Carl Roberts. Let's bring this up. Should we talk? We'll talk about it now. Not to detract from the conversation, will you have discussions around your expectations or predictions for Tenet before Wednesday?
Good. We
haven't outright discussed that as yet. I would say we'll get back to you on that. We'll have a chat.
We haven't settled on the fact whether if you want to see it, let us know. But we have debating the idea of because we're basically going to go on a road trip Wednesday morning. It's going to be great. It's going to be a whole Nolan themed day. We've got like Nolan playlist on Spotify, all good to go and everything like that. And it's all gearing up for our travels to go and see Tenet in London at the BFI. So we were talking about maybe doing like a vlog kind of thing where we're filming like as we're driving there or as we're actually at the IMAX and things like that. But you probably won't see that unless we stream it live, or if we're going to edit it, you won't see that until after the fact. But no, that's a good thing. Maybe if we can squeeze it in, potentially we might have our final thoughts. But yeah, that's a good.
We do have some other Nolan stuff that is coming this month that's not on the schedule. Very quick, Anne Hathaway's gorgeous, even more in real life. That woman is not real. I'm super jealous.
I haven't beheld that woman yet. Hopefully one day.
Right, sorry, I completely lost us. I should say that's the end. Final thoughts on Interstellar. I'm going to go with you.
Final thoughts. It's a mixed one. I think that 75% to 80 is probably a fair score for it, in my opinion. It probably would sit at that if I'm going to rank it. I don't like ranking films out of 10, but I'd probably give it like a 7 out of 10 or something like that. In terms of a spectacle, I think it's definitely one of Nolan's best films, and I really appreciate the fact that he did break the mold. He went into sci-fi with Inception, but that was predominantly sort of like a heist film. This was full-blown space, and I really appreciated that he did take on another genre that he hadn't done before. It was uncharted territory for him. It is exciting in a lot of points. The real crux of it, though, and the thing that I respond to the most in it is the dynamic between Matthew McConaughey and Murph and Jessica Chastain's character. That father-daughter story is, without a doubt, the best part of the film for me. The spectacle's gorgeous, the soundtrack and everything like that. Where it falters, in my opinion, because I do have problems with this film, is in the surrounding characters. I don't think we really connect with them as much. I think maybe some, because there are some space films that I can think of or that deal with space where we like more than just one character. I'm looking at Apollo 13, for example. Fairly small cast and crew, but you do really appreciate everyone in that film. And even Ridley Scott's Alien, I would say that each of them have personalities and a big cast in that film. And yes, they do all get picked off, but I feel like I know more about their characters than I do for like a handful of characters in this for almost double the runtime, probably. So I think it falters in that respect, and I would have just liked more tension of the dire straits that Earth faces. And as all these decades are going by, it really doesn't feel any different from how it did at the beginning of the film. I think if you'd have added in that element to it, I think that would have not only enhanced the rest of the film, but the rush to get back to Earth wouldn't just be based on a father-daughter storyline. It would be about humanity as a whole. And I think if it had nailed that part, there are some on-the-nose parts in the screenwriting, as I said, that aren't very subtle. But for the most part, it's a perfectly serviceable film. It deals with some really complex ideas, really interesting ideas. If you like science and everything like that, as you mentioned, it's, apart from the ending, maybe, it's a very accurate film for what it deals with. And the fact that he went to those lengths as well to keep it as much as he could, as grounded as possible. And I do appreciate that for a sci-fi film. It feels like a true science fiction film, not like a science fantasy film or anything like that. This is like proper science kind of stuff that it talks about. And you can quote me on that. Chris says it is proper science. I'm not a scientist, same as you, George. I think it's fine. It's good. It's a solid movie. I enjoyed rewatching it a lot more than I did watching it for the first time. So I'm really glad that I did go back to this one. But it's not in my top 3. I don't even know if it'd be in my top 5 yet. But we will have a ranking video, so I guess I'll decide at that point.
Final thoughts on this one for me. I love the fact that Nolan took on hardcore old school sci-fi. It feels him out of his comfort zone. We do have spectacle, we do have grandiose things, we do have different themes, but this feels the most un-Nolan of some of his work. The father-daughter dynamic, when previously we obviously have sort of male protagonists. We kind of laughed sharp suits, all that sort of stuff. We don't get too many of them in this one. But with this film, I feel more than anything, it's a very personal story being told on the biggest possible scale, which is obviously interstellar travel between dimensions. So I do like that. I think the Earth aspect of it is slightly weaker than obviously the father-daughter relationship. So it's more the stakes for him leaving. I'm not sold on that the same with you. but I do believe that this is one of his strongest films. And from an emotional standpoint, I've not been put on a level like this from any of his work before and the one after. To take my hand, I think it's a very interesting journey, and I think this film more than others that as I do get older, even the 5 years that have passed between sort of viewing 3 and 4, I think this is a film that could creep up my, not respect for, because I obviously respect all his work, but this could be a film that as I grow older, I get more attached to. And I do think that could be the case with many people. Certainly, I'd imagine fathers would interact with this a lot more than other people. So I'm very intrigued for the long term, but I think it stands out in his filmography so broadly compared to some of his films we can sort of group together, obviously for good reasons, not many for bad, but this feels like the most out there, that it feels unique. It stands out enough that most directors would have this down as the best film they've ever done. And yet we're here, we have someone that's done better, politely put, but certainly serviceable to the genre and for the story he wants to tell. So I'll give him that. But to me, my favorite thing in this is the Hans Zimmer score. The Nolan Zimmer duo, to me, is one of the most powerful collaborations in cinema, in modern day cinema. Certainly the best since Williams and Spielberg. Yeah. So that's my kind of polite final thoughts on this. I'm very intrigued for the ranking video because I feel like I've ranked them except 1 and 2. Which is a big hint.
I haven't ranked them in my head yet, so I have no idea. I'm as clueless as everyone else is on the ranking at the moment. So, but I will decide after Tenet, because we will be doing that one after Tenet. We should say that the ranking. So we are going to include that one. Yeah. Granted, Tenet won't have been in our mind for as long as some of these movies are, but I think it's fair to still rank it at the time as well. Although obviously that could all change.
Quick comment, brilliant. I love this movie. I imagine it would destroy me as a father. That's what I'm afraid of one day, long way away. But no, we've got a couple of comments worth mentioning. Carl obviously replied to Carl saying thanks for taking the question. He'd love to see a vlog. Same with Brinsley. So me and Chris will have a chat. We'll put some ideas together, guys. Might be a case of bringing a laptop and editing in the car on the way home. Let's not go too far away. But yeah, that was our kind of polite review on Interstellar. It's been a lot longer than we thought, but it's still less than the Dark Knight Trilogy, maybe even longer than Inception. I can't actually remember. It's been a great month. So as usual, thank you all for commenting along. It's obviously, we like getting the comments, like being able to discuss these on the stream as well with you. And we're going to quickly bring up the schedule for the penultimate time, which is obviously we've got Dunkirk coming this Monday and Tenet coming on Wednesday. We do have some more content which we will announce probably with the Tenet release. So stick along to our social media for this. We'll obviously talk about the Tenet review and the Dunkirk review, but we're on Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, Instagram at Cinema_Savvy. And as we mentioned, we've got a TeePublic store in the link in the description below. And you can get our nice Cin Copy Cinema Savvy logo, which we hopefully can have longer than Nolan month, but we'll have a discussion on that too. So yeah, that's everything I've got to say on Interstellar. And yourself?
Yeah, I've said pretty much everything else. It's great that we had people commenting as well towards the end. So thank you to everyone for joining on, talking about Interstellar and sharing your memories and thoughts with that as well. And yeah, just appreciating Nolan month, because we certainly are as well. It's been great going through all these films. I have actually already seen Dunkirk. I was very ahead of the game with these films. I was very proud of myself for getting them all watched. And I think we already have a review for Dunkirk on the channel. I think it was obviously one of the Oscar films, wasn't it, that we did, but we'll have different things to say on it. We're not a one-trick pony when it comes to, I think we've had some films that we've probably done like 2 or 3 videos on at this point. So, well, certainly 2. I think some might even have 3, but we always find a different way to talk about it. So there will be new things in that. And obviously there's been a big span of years since Dunkirk came out, and we've had other war films in between that we might be comparing it to as well. So there's still a lot to say on that. But yeah, once again, big thank you to everyone for joining us, and we'll see you again on Monday for our Dunkirk discussion. So we'll see you then.